Hello, welcome to the Better Outcomes Show, where we explore the possibilities of a new healthcare. Each episode, we bring you a conversation with leaders across the healthcare industry, exploring topics ranging from new treatment techniques and interventions to novel service delivery methods and business models. And now your host, Rafi Salazar from Rehab Practice Solutions, a leader in patient engagement and retention strategy. Let's explore the possibilities of a new healthcare.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Better Outcomes Show. I'm your host, Rafi Salazar. I'm sure you heard that in the intro, though, right? So, if you are new to the show, thanks for being here. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for giving us just a little bit of your time to hear what we're all about here. If you're a returning listener, thanks for coming back. Thanks for sharing the show. Thanks for being part of what makes this show fun and awesome. Now, if you've been following any of the past few episodes that we've put out, past interviews with experts in the field, you'll see and you will have noticed that much of the innovation and much of the topic material that we've been covering has really centered around technology. So we had somebody talking about artificial intelligence and video and how using a technology platform like that can help improve clinical outcomes. We've had multiple folks on the show talking about telehealth, different ways to implement it, either from a biomedical or like more of a physical dysfunction realm or frame of reference, all the way to mental health and emotional well-being, and how clinicians can leverage telehealth in those settings as well, group therapy, group treatments. And then we've also talked about virtual health, asynchronous health, if you would, and how we can leverage technology to increase and improve communication, access, quality, all of that kind of stuff. But it's all focused around technology. However, when we talk about and we think about ways that we can innovate in healthcare or ways that we can try something new, so to speak, sometimes it means going back to something more simple, right? A more simple setting, a more simple context. So my guest this week is Laura Park Figueroa. She's an occupational therapist and she runs a nature-based practice in pediatrics. So her clientele are all children that might be either experiencing some sort of emotional, behavioral, or developmental limitation or issue. And she leverages nature, the context of nature, to improve outcomes for her clients. So we talk a lot about the research, the evidence, the literature that supports using nature as a medium for healthcare delivery, kind of the way to structure the way we should think about how we use nature and nature-based activities within the context of treatment. And then we also talk about her proprietary approach. She's developed an approach called the Contigo approach that's all about connection, transformation, and obviously being in the outdoors, in the great outdoors. She's also the host of the Mind Your OT Business podcast, and we talk a little bit about that show as well. So if you have thought about nature-based therapy, or if you've heard about it, you really haven't experienced it and you'd want to know more, this episode will hopefully provide a good amount of insight, both from a practical level, this is how you structure, or this is how you should think about structuring treatments that are based in nature, all the way through to the theoretical and the evidence in the literature. It's a little bit on the long side, however, I think it's definitely worth it. So without further ado, here's Laura Park Figueroa talking about nature-based therapy. Hey, Laura, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Rafi. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. For those who might not know you in the greater healthcare space, who are you and what do you do?
My name's Laura Park Figueroa. I am an occupational therapist and I do a lot of things. So the primary thing we're going to talk about today is I run a nature-based occupational therapy practice for children in the Bay Area of California. It's called Outdoor Kids OT. And I started that 5 years ago now, and we've grown a treatment approach out of that that is a nature-based therapy approach for children, not just for OTs, but it can be used in any healthcare profession. And along with that, I got really interested in researching this further. So I'm working on a PhD right now at Texas Women's University
Oh, wow.
to study nature-based therapy for children. And I'm going to be starting my dissertation probably next year. So
Oh, good luck
it's
on that.
really, yeah, it's really exciting. I feel like a lot of people are like, how are you doing all of this? And I think it just feeds, the research feeds my love for what we do. It feeds creating a model that will work, that's based on evidence, and what the research says about the best way to provide nature-based therapy for children. And the work in my practice just is a way to work that out, right? To like actually
Yeah, you're
provide
like
that
live
service. So
demoing it, so to speak.
yeah, right. And then I also I have some people may know me because I have a podcast called Mind Your OT Business. So I work with OT entrepreneurs and nature-based practitioners to help them with the business side of their
Of
work,
running a
because that's my
practice.
other passion. So I love nature-based therapy and I love entrepreneurship. Those are my two like things I do in my work right now that just really light me up. So
Yes. And the podcast is good. Go to episode, I can't remember which one I was on, but go to that one. It's a good one.
oh yeah, I think it was, I can't
It
remember
was
either. I
early.
could look it
Yeah.
up before the end. It's probably like somewhere between 10 and 13, I think.
Yeah. So, anyways, so let's talk a little bit about nature-based therapy then. So, let's talk about that, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the research, because now that you're doing that,
Yeah.
I kind of want to hit that. So, what is, when we say nature-based therapy or nature-based treatment, what is it?
Well, it means a lot of different things to different therapists. So I
And
think,
different clinicians, right? Like different
yeah,
disciplines might look at it differently.
absolutely. And I think there's a lot of different ways to interpret it. So for me, what in my practice, the way I look at nature-based therapy is if you are using nature, and I don't even like to say using nature really, it's better to say partnering with nature,
Being
um,
in
co
nature.
yeah, co-facilitating a therapy session with nature. Those are the kind of language I like to use around it, because really that's part of our model at Outdoor Kids OT. The way I look at it is you are in partnership with nature for the benefit of that child or of your client. So you're looking at nature, partnering with nature as co-facilitator of your therapy session to augment progress towards goals. And I could go into a million ways that nature does that, but really looking at nature as the ideal space to work on therapy goals because of the many benefits that we all receive as humans from being in nature, especially in
Yeah,
a
mental
world
health
where we're
wise,
so.
emotional wise, all of that.
Yes, absolutely. There's so much research around mental health for children, motor skills, social skills, their motivation to play and explore. You're going to hear me talk a lot about children. Some of this does apply to adults
Yeah.
too, but the research is really clear on that, and it just kind of, several years ago hit me that like, gosh, it's such a perfect partnership. The stuff we work on in OT, it's such a perfect partnership to do it in partnership with nature because of all the benefits nature offers. So that's how I define it. Um, but I realized very quickly that different professionals, even OTs, define it differently, because you have a whole, and even in the literature, we see this saying it's very difficult to define what nature-based
Yeah, it's kind
means.
of a big blanket
But
term. Everything that you do outside
yes,
gets thrown into
right.
nature-based therapy, like beekeeping and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. So people, people might call nature-based therapy like therapy that is like adventure therapy, where you're kayaking or you're mountaineering. There's a lot of research on veterans and
Oh
adventure
yeah.
therapy, going out into nature for mental health and treatment of PTSD. So there's that kind of leg, right? Then there's animal assisted therapy, like hippotherapy, or like canine, using dogs in therapy. And some people see that as nature because animals are
Our
part of
nature.
our,
They're
yeah,
natural.
they're part of our world, right? They're other living beings. And that kind of relates to, I might kind of sprinkle in the research, because as things come up, I think I'm gonna remember research or theories that may
Yeah.
apply,
Go
right?
for it.
So um, the biophilia hypothesis, which was proposed by E.O. Wilson, I think in the 80s it was. This is good practice for my
For your
exams in
dissertation
the
coming up,
fall when I'm
right?
going to be tested on all this. I have to remember all the research in my head, right? But he came up with this idea of the biophilia hypothesis, which is essentially that living beings have an innate desire to connect with nature, with other living beings, with plants, animals in the natural world, to kind of explain that idea that we evolved in nature, like our
Yeah,
human selves evolved in close connection with nature. And so I could see where animal assisted therapy could
kind
be
of
part
falls
of
under
that,
that.
right? But for me, like when I talk about nature-based therapy, I'm mainly talking about therapy in a setting that is away from the built environment, where you're not. So the parks where we do our therapy services are relatively uncultivated. They kind of feel like wild
Not a lot of paved
spaces.
paths and any.
Yeah, like not a manicured urban park.
Uh-huh.
Not that you couldn't do outdoor therapy there, right? And call it nature based, because you can connect to nature in any setting. I think there's value in the nature in our own backyards, in
Exactly. Yeah.
the pavement in an urban neighborhood where some random beautiful flower crops up, and how resilient is that? You can notice that nature in daily life, right? But when I speak about nature-based therapy in my practice, I'm talking about the setting and the partnership with nature. So we're in wilder nature,
Uh-huh.
wild nearby nature. We're not talking about
You're
out
not
in the
driving two
mountains.
hours, right?
Yeah. We want it to be accessible as possible to families. So we're talking about, nature that's within 20 minutes probably of the families' homes that we serve, but that feels relatively wild um, when you're there. So.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up all kinds of questions. So like you're doing these in parks or these national parks or like my brain is thinking like, okay, you're doing it in a park. So what kind of liability is there? What, like, do you have to pull
Right.
licenses? All of that.
Yeah. So we pull permit. I mean, we have permits with the parks to
Okay.
use the parks if required. Some parks don't require it. If you're a small group under a certain size, you have to just look at your
Uh-huh.
area and find out, do the digging on the websites to find out what they require in your area. So usually most parks that are regional or local parks, that's mostly what we use. We don't have a
Uh-huh.
national. There might be one national park that's drivable, but it would probably be like 45 minutes from me, but we don't
Yeah,
we don't
too
offer
far.
services there. But I would look into regional and local parks because the fees tend to be lower to have a permit, or sometimes free. They don't require
They
you
don't
if
even
you're
have
not
them.
using, yeah, if you're not using like a specific site, then you're allowed to use the park as a community space. So
Okay.
it's community based therapy. Essentially, you're using a community space to offer the therapy service.
Awesome. So then what kind of, I guess, let's talk specifically about your area of expertise, which is kids and all that. So what kind of diagnoses or areas are you addressing in your treatments?
Yeah, so I learned really quickly. This is a great question because I hope that this will save some of your listeners time if they are interested in in doing this. Because when I first started out, I think I had this hilarious vision that children would like happily write in a nature journal at the end of every session what they had learned, and it was just going to be so idyllic and perfect. And really with kids, like when they're in nature, they don't want to sit down and reflect and write in a journal the way an adult would, right? It's all about
Yes.
play. and
Uh-huh.
and that's what I love about getting kids out in nature, is they just so naturally become like in their element. They just play. So there is some structure to our sessions. We don't
Uh-huh.
just let them run wild. But basically what I learned right away was, there are certain things that are really great to work on in a nature setting with children specifically. So we our kind of tagline in my practice is, we help kids become more coordinated, confident, calm, and caring.
Oh, I like
And
that
those
alliteration.
Yeah. I had like 7 C's at the beginning. That was too many for a tagline. But basically we kind of came up with that from the idea that those are the things that we feel like nature really helps children with. So coordination is their motor skills. Really, it's a lot of gross motor. If you think about
Uh-huh.
how these kids, so PTs, I'm looking at you. You should be doing workout in nature. It is amazing for
Yeah, different
balance.
terrain, all kinds of
Yes.
stuff.
They're moving the whole time. I mean, a future study I want to do is actually like putting I don't even know what they're called. PTs would probably know, like pedometers or accelerometers, something that would measure how much movement children were actually doing during a session.
Uh-huh.
Do it in an indoor setting and do it
And then
in
do
a
the same one
nature-based setting
outdoors. Yeah.
and compare. It would be so interesting because they move so much in our sessions. And the fine motor too, they find a flower that they want to look at or a bug, and they have to be very gentle and careful with it. These experiences to work on motor skills just happen so naturally. So that's coordination. Coordinated confident is really looking at their mental health, essentially. That's
Uh-huh.
our parent friendly word for mental health. Like, we want kids to feel like they can express themselves, like they have value in the world, they have an opinion and they want to share it with the group, that they can take risks and do things that are a little bit challenging for them, and that it's safe to do that, in the context of our group.
Yeah. Allowing them to have some sort
um,
of like self-mastery over a challenging experience or something like that.
yes. Yeah. I mean, that does go. I love OA theory, occupational adaptation theory. And there's that concept of relative mastery, like a child
Uh-huh.
becoming more um, effective, efficient, and satisfied with how they're doing something. So
Yeah.
that's kind of that confidence piece, right? To tie it into theory a little bit. But so it's coordinated, confident. Calm is referring to self-regulation. So that sensory aspect of how nature is a multi-sensory environment that is also at the same time really calming for children. Like, there's something about being in nature where our eyes are using distance vision rather than that up
Uh-huh.
close screen that they're
Yeah.
on so much,
The
right?
blue light.
Right. Yeah. And there is some research. Most of it is, I think there's a really big study out of China, I think it was, um, that the more children spend time outdoors, the less incidence they have of myopia.
Oh,
So
okay.
so using that distance vision is so important to kind of balance out the screen time that all kids are more exposed to nowadays. So that self-regulation piece, I mean, we explicitly work on that in our groups, like helping kids learn to self-regulate, but that calm word also refers to how nature is such an optimal place to work on sensory processing and integration for kids.
Uh-huh.
And then caring is social skills. That's like working with children on how to get along with others, how to, the confidence to make friends and play games and take turns and do all those fun things we do when we're out in a group with our friends in the woods. So those are
Yeah.
kind of the areas we work on. I don't know if I answered your question about diagnoses. Do you want me to go into that too?
Well, no, I
Like the
mean,
types of kids?
yeah, kind of what you just described kind of sounds like it, not that it's good for everybody, but
Right.
it's not like you're taking a group of, let's say, people with autism or just a group of kids with cerebral palsy. Like, there's really the ability to mix and match, and anybody that can make it to
Yeah.
this park on this day can go to a group and still get something out of it, right?
Yeah, it's really those four areas. I think it allows us to kind of mix our groups and know that we can work on any of those areas. And ideally, the groups have a mix of all those needs.
Uh-huh.
Like, and that doesn't always ideally happen. Like, we've had groups, some groups it really works out, and other groups it's harder because the mix of needs is not as ideal. But ideally, you have, like, maybe one kid who struggles with motor skills, but there's another kid who struggles with social skills, and there's another kid who might have some confidence issues, and there's another kid who might have some sensory issues, and you mix them all together, and then they're modeling for each other. They're
Exactly.
they're
Yeah.
they're able to kind of encourage one another and see that everybody's unique and different. And so ideally you have a mix of those. But we market our services to families with children who have autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, or motor coordination issues, and not so much mental health. I've had a hard time not, because I'm
Because
not
of the stigma
so.
there, or the language around how
No.
you would do it, or
Yeah, maybe the language on how we would do it, but I also feel like that's a very specialty area too, that
uh-huh.
I feel like I would want to make sure our therapist had training in how
Okay.
to specifically, if we're going to market to children with mental health diagnoses, um, I want to make sure that we are serving them well and using evidence-based practice. Now, that doesn't mean that some kids that come to us don't have anxiety or
Yeah.
diagnosed diagnosed mental health concerns, but we're not marketing specifically to
Specifically to
those
them.
people quite yet. And it's something I'm really interested in doing. It's just my wheels are starting to turn about what does that look like, and how do we do it well in the business?
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think, just as somebody who is in and out of mental health, practicing and consulting, like the idea of mental health, it is very broad because obviously it touches everything. And you do have people that offer things as mental health services, and you end up looking at them, you're like, that might not be exactly what the like best practice according to the literature. So
yeah.
the idea of making sure that you're rock solid on your evidence before you move into that
Yeah.
area.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think the evidence is totally there for nature-based practice for mental health needs with children and adolescents, both.
Yeah, I could see that for
There's
sure.
several good systematic reviews that have talked about that recently. But I just want to make sure that we are providing really great services for those kids.
Uh-huh.
If we're gonna specifically, my brain goes to like trauma, and I want to make sure that
Yes.
that if that is a piece, and I know that a lot of kids we already serve probably have had trauma in their backgrounds, because we know the incidence of trauma is very high among a lot of children, right? Like all of us have had it
Exactly.
in different ways in our lives. But yeah, so it's just something I think to think about in the future, and maybe work with my team on, is this an element that we really want to layer in, and how do we serve that particular population really well. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of talked a little bit about what it, the diagnoses you may see, the things you're working on.
Hmm.
Are you doing structured tasks? And if so, like, how does that work? Are you doing things over terrain to work specifically on gross motor? Or are you trying to facilitate sort of like just an experience of being in nature that ends up with therapeutic outcomes?
Yeah, so I would say that when I first started out, I tried to be more structured,
Uh-huh.
um, and also had some experiences when I first started out where being unstructured did not work as well. So I started out running really large camps through a national organization, an international organization, really. It's kind of like a franchise.
Okay.
And part of the reason that I moved to a more therapeutic, smaller group model for my practice is because of the experiences that some children had at the larger group camp, which was a relatively unstructured curriculum. Like a
Uh-huh.
lot of it was unstructured free play, which is so beneficial for children, and I love that for most children. There were certain children who really did not thrive in that environment because they did not have the structure they needed to, or the skills that they
As
needed
I
to
say, the
know how to
social
play.
skills even. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So this approach really grew out of seeing the needs of particular children that had these types of developmental challenges. And we now have in our small groups, and we run a summer camp too that is limited to 10 kids and 2 therapists. So it's still a small
Oh,
group,
still
essentially.
small.
It's one
Yeah.
therapist to 5 kids, right? So our small groups where we offer therapy services are always 5 or sometimes 6 kids with a therapist and 1 or 2 assistants, who are usually OT, pre-OT students that need their volunteer hours, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, so it's a really small group, and what we've come to that works really well is a mix of a structured therapy activity plan for the day that is still created to be novel, very fun and engaging for children, but we're specifically targeting their goals with that therapy activity. So we plan the therapy activity based on the needs of the kids in the group. Um, and then there is a large portion of our session that is, we call it supported free play time. So we don't call it just free play, because the word supported means that we understand that these children may need
They need some
some
assistance.
support
Yeah.
from us during free play time. And what that looks like is us, the therapist and the volunteers or other staff, noticing, just being aware of when kids are playing, and they can stand back and we might not be in the mix playing the game with the kids, whatever they're doing, building a fort or climbing a tree or playing chase, whatever they're doing, right? That's their own chosen activity. So we won't get in the mix with them unless they want us to. But what it does mean is we're specifically looking during the free play time for ways to support the children's goals.
Yeah.
So we know what each individual kid in that group needs to work on. And when we see a potential conflict situation starting with that kiddo that we know has a really hard time navigating conflict with peers, we can get closer. We can give a verbal script for them to use. We can stand nearby and give support as needed. We can ask questions to help them process the conversation going on, whatever it looks like to support that child.
Uh-huh.
So it's
You're kind of like
really,
setting the guardrails and letting them kind of
yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah, it's like, and we always put it back. We always want the kids to be problem solving. We use a lot of, it's called inquiry-based learning in like forest school education,
Uh-huh.
like outdoor education principles, essentially. You're wanting the children to come to their own understanding about things rather than you telling them.
Yeah, you want them to develop the skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you're asking questions to help them problem solve, to help them think through things rather than giving them the answers all the time. So our session, long story short or long story long, which is usually the case with me, like our sessions are a mix of a structured time so that the kids have a really clear, structure throughout the day. So they feel comforted by that. They know what to expect every week. But then there's also a significant time that we do free play. And our sessions are long. I actually really recommend this to people. This is another tip if people are interested in this. Don't do just a 45-minute or 1 hour session outside. You need time.
Yeah.
So you need time to walk to where you're going to play. You need time to let the structured therapy activity happen. You need time to give them free play time. So we do our sessions are 1 hour and 45 minutes long for our groups. Some of them are 2 hours. So
Oh, wow,
the Saturday
yeah.
groups are 2 hours because there's less of them per year. So we're trying to get the same number of minutes, but in less
Uh-huh.
weeks. So
yeah, well, I'd imagine
yeah.
something too, like, I've got 4 kids that are 5 and under, and my oldest is very, like, he's outgoing and stuff once he gets warmed up. But it takes him, 15, 20 minutes he'll
Yeah.
sit and watch people kind of do their thing before he gets involved. And then once he gets involved, it's like, oh, he's home. You see what's going on. So I can see doing like a shorter, like we're going to do a 45-minute thing here. You're some of those kids that, especially if you're working on those social skills, right?
Yeah.
They get robbed of that time almost if they need some extra time to process or observe before feeling comfortable.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm sorry, can we just circle back to bow before you that you have 4 children under the age of 5?
Well,
oh
no,
my
the
gosh.
oldest just became 5 this year. So we got 5.
That,
I've got 5, 3, 1, and 6 months old.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, 4 months old, actually.
That's amazing.
Crazy.
You're amazing.
Well,
Well,
my
congrats.
wife is amazing.
Gosh, brand new baby. Yes, and your wife is amazing. Let's talk about her being amazing too. That is incredible.
She gets a trophy,
I love it.
for sure.
You just mentioned it so casually. Like I have 4 kids under the age of 5. I'm like, hold on, back up, bow before you. Okay, sorry. On to the interview.
Anyways, yeah. So I had a question. Okay, so you do these groups and they're 2 hours long and you're working specifically, the structure time and the unstructured time, but you mentioned goals. So before a child does a group or participates in a group with you, are you doing some kind of assessment or evaluation or something with the child and the parents to kind of come up with, okay, these are the goals for little Sammy or something like that?
Yeah. So when I started, okay, I am so laughing that you just used the word Sammy because I wrote an article that's coming out in the AOTA special interest section, and the case study name is Sam. So
awesome.
not a real name of a client we had. It was just a stand-in, but still, like, that was hilarious.
Yeah.
So that's coming out in August. So if people want to read about the approach we use and stuff, that's going to be in there. And you can read about the case study of Sam.
Yeah.
Yes, so that is in the article too, if people want more info about it. But basically so the approach that I developed is called the Contigo approach, and it stands for connection and transformation in the great outdoors. And it part of the approach is that we are specifically offering therapy outdoors. So it is not just a unstructured playtime, which is, again, awesome.
It's not like a
for
group,
kids, like
social group or whatever.
Yeah, it's not just a health and wellness service where we're promoting the health and well-being of children, because that's great and awesome, but if you are providing what you are marketing as a therapy service, I personally believe that you should be doing some sort of assessment, you should be writing goals, you should be tracking progress, and you should be
Exactly.
reporting on progress to families. And so that's a big part of the training I do for therapists in the Contigo approach, is walking through like how you can structure this when you do run nature-based sessions. So I mean, I can go into what I do in my practice if you feel like it would be helpful to
Yeah, sure,
listeners, if you want
sure.
me to kind of tell them. We use primarily online assessments because it's easy for group intake. Like when you're bringing in a group of 5 to 6 children, um, another tip learned from failure, okay, or like craziness learned from craziness
Yeah,
in the beginning. When I first started, I was like, okay, I'm going to do an in-person assessment visit for all kids that come in the group. And it is not financially sustainable to do that if you have staff.
yeah,
Or you'd have to be running such a high level, you'd have to charge so much for the service
exactly. Yeah.
to make it, I don't know. It was much more efficient for us. And as we went along, we realized that we can do some of these assessments online where parents fill out
Like a
their
questionnaire or something like that.
yeah, the standardized assessment online. So we use the sensory processing measure and the Vineland adaptive behavior scales. There are other ones. I'm actually considering some social emotional ones to kind of get into more of
To
that
that
mental
mental
health
health. Yeah.
piece, because that's what we work on a lot with kids. But right now, that's what we use, and that has worked fine. And I check in with my therapist every year to say, hey, do you guys, are you feeling like these are still good, or do we need to consider other assessments? And we'll be having that meeting in a month or two to kind of talk about that. But it has worked well. I mean, we get those back. My practice manager manages those, gets them into the EMR when they come in. And so the therapist can log into the EMR just to see the assessment results. And
Uh-huh.
then from there, they can kind of see, like, is this mix of kids going to be okay? And occasionally, it does not happen often, but occasionally we have to say, like, this might not be a good fit for these kids. And we have to have conversations with parents about restructuring the groups a little bit, like maybe moving a kid to a different group that might
Yeah,
be a
or
better fit.
shuffling the groups
Um,
up. Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of how we do it. So we do those assessments, and we do our own intake forms too, of course, like asking very specific questions. But one of the key things is that we really value listening to parents. And this is what I love about private practice, and what I love about what this whole podcast is about, Rafi, which I love the topic of this podcast, is just thinking about how we can create businesses that are really offering effective services for our clients in ways that are maybe not the traditional like
Exactly.
way. And I I love private practice because, and specifically cash-based private practice, because you really can serve your client. Like, you really can say what is important to you, and you don't have to be like, oh, well, the insurance probably won't pay for that, or oh, the school's telling me I can't work on that because it's not educationally relevant, whatever. Like,
Exactly.
um, so we listen to parents, and what parent concerns are, and that's kind of how we drive our goals. So we match that to the assessments that come out and kind of decide why might the challenge that the parent is reporting be happening. And then we write a goal or two. I've always said one goal is enough, but my therapists always want to be like, well, let's just write one more.
Exactly.
They always want
Yeah.
to have more than one
We
goal.
learned how to write these
But
in school. We want to use them.
right. So a child will have one or two goals, and it makes it really it makes it really targeted, because when you have that one goal for that child, like, you can keep that in mind, when you're running a group session. If you have 5 children that each have 5 goals, there's no way you are going
It's
to
overload.
hit all of it's total overload.
Well,
Also
and how
learned
long
from
are your
experience.
like your lengths of I guess lengths of care or plan of care last? Because I imagine you're not seeing them for a year, right?
Yeah, well, we are
Oh,
most of them. So
okay.
that's another thing for your listeners, that, like, thinking about different ways to structure your services, right? So what we found in the early years, we used to run in 10-week sessions. So we would have like one in the fall, and then we'd have 2 10-week sessions in the spring, because the spring is way longer. It's like way longer than September to December. So it was a 10-week session in the fall, 2 10-week sessions in the spring, like January to March, and then March to May or June. What we realized is that the kids started to make the most progress when
near
the
the
groups
end.
really well like mid-year, when the groups really gelled, like February was when we started to see like there's a flow, there's a feeling of comfort in the group, there's a feeling of familiarity between the kids and also with the therapists and the children and the volunteers. Like, so we made the decision, I think the third year that I was in practice, we made the decision as a team to transition to a school year model. And basically we have waivers or like not a waiver, a policy that we have families sign that says, I understand this is a school year program, and it also communicates our commitment to them to say, if we feel like your child does not need therapy anymore, we will not keep you on therapy. We're not going to be unethical, right?
Yeah.
So we check in December and March. So we write a progress note in December and June, but basically parents can even opt out a couple of times throughout the year. So we don't make it like you're locked in for the whole year.
Yeah, you're
You
not
know,
signing a contract for a year, but
yeah,
the
but
program is available for that long.
yeah, and we do charge a cancellation fee if families choose to opt out mid-year. It's nominal. It's like $100, I think, or something. Basically just because we have to then fill that spot, and there's administrative work behind that, right? But this model, I really feel so strongly that when switching to this year-long format where it's a school year program, it has increased happiness of our clients because our parents are bought in. You know, they are present and bought in for the school year. They know that this is a commitment they've made for the school year. The families have bonded more, like the relationships between
Well, and
parents,
you're getting
because it's
support
stable.
and yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting way to think about like structuring a service for children, you know, to say that we're gonna be in this for a year, for 9 months, whatever it is, once we start in September and end in late May or early June, and that we're committed to your family for that time, and that we of course will tell you if we feel like your child doesn't need therapy anymore. And that's something I didn't say. So part of the Contigo approach is that we have peer playmates in the group who are not receiving therapy. It's really hard to fill those spots because I think consumers feel like there is, I'm just going to say it because I'm frank, but there is stigma around children that have diagnoses or disabilities
Yes.
or
My kid
whatever.
doesn't have that. My kid is normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're going to pick up bad behaviors if they go there. But slowly we've kind of, you know, we've had kids who have been, it started because we had kids who were in the program that we were saying to the family, like, we don't think they really need OT anymore. They've met their goals. They're doing great. Like, you know, there's not, we wouldn't say they need to continue. And they were like, well, can we keep coming but not pay for OT? We were like, okay, let's make a service. So that's kind of been part of our model now. So it's a really nice like step down, you know, if a kid
It
doesn't
doesn't
need
need
OT
full OT
anymore.
services, but they can still get the benefit of the group.
Yeah.
Well, and
So
I think,
that's what we tend to do. We transition kids into that pay because it costs less because we're not doing, you know, assessment and progress reporting and all the documentation on goals. And it's the
they're
peer
just showing
playmates
up
are
and
really
participating basically.
Totally. Yeah. And if families, you know, if families ask for OT consult, then we're like, well, it's not an OT service. We can't ethically provide OT services for a child that we have not done the OT assessment on, or the process, you know, like the process of assessment and goal writing and all of that. So, but generally those kids are kids that we've had in our groups that are ready to kind of, you know, step into a different role or not have us tracking goals on them. So.
Yeah. Well, I just like the entire idea. You know, I work with adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, supporting them out in the community. And there's just so much benefit for the folks, the individuals themselves who might have a disability interacting
Mm-hmm.
with, you know, for lack of a better word, typical developers and that kind of thing. From
Yeah.
a social skills learning standpoint. You know, you take one of my partners, my business partner always says it's like, think about self-contained classrooms. Even like you take a kid that has
Yeah.
crummy social skills and you put
Yep.
them in a room full of other kids that have crummy social skills, and then you wonder why at the end of the year they all have crummy social skills, you know? Like
Yeah.
there's benefits to exposing kids, whether typical or with a disability, to folks across the developmental spectrum, if you would, from all
Yeah.
standpoints,
Yep.
so I love that idea. So okay, so where we were talking about where we were, you're doing these groups, we talked about the assessments that you do. Let's
Hmm.
talk a little bit about, kind of, we had touched around this a little bit, but your specific method, which is a Contigo
Okay.
method. So talk about
Yep.
what each of those three chunks are for us.
Yeah. So the first one is connection, and that refers to the fact that we are a group. Like we're
Yes,
offering our services in the context of other people, because relationships, human relationships, are so foundational to everything about being a human. And so
yes, exactly. We're social creatures.
even yeah, ideally, even when we do, because we do some individual services, but ideally, even when we do that, we're encouraging parents to be present, or siblings, or a friend to come with them, or something, so that it makes it really playful for the children. And it also refers to connection to nature as being very important for our health and well-being as humans as well. So connection to others and connection to nature is what the connection piece stands for. The transformation is really referring to that need for us as therapists to use evidence-based practice as best we can. Now, I know that sometimes innovative ways of practicing are not necessarily supported by a ton of evidence when they first come out. And sometimes early adopters are some of the most effective therapists, right? Because they're willing to
Exactly.
think outside the box. But with what we do in our groups, I really wanted to highlight the idea that we as therapists should be continually learning and growing, continually knowing what evidence is saying
Yeah,
about,
what's coming out, what's being published regularly.
yes, yeah, what is evidence saying about the most effective ways to support coordination, confidence, caring, and calmness in children. Um, so that's a lot of what is in the training that I offer too in the Contigo approach. Like I offer a lot of resources to support those skills, like research and specific ways that are clearly supported by research that you can support
That are
those different areas
verifiable.
with children. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I imagine you kind of mentioned it too, like innovators being kind of on the cutting edge. Part of my, I'm not going to say I have a problem with higher education, but the idea
Yeah.
of evidence-based practice is great, especially the way it sounds like we're going to do things that are only proved by evidence. But the reality is, like, we're teaching things at the university that are in, future directions, or like emerging practice areas
Yep.
that are, they're emerging practice areas now because the research is just coming out, but people have been doing it for years and been having success, right?
Right.
So
Right.
how do you take that understanding that, okay, what we're seeing in the literature is lagging by, a few years, because it takes time to do a study and to get everything. And so how do we take that information, knowing that the evidence is already lagging, and then maybe hearing about this new nature-based technique? So do you
Right.
filter things through, and how do you do that?
Oh, that's a big question. I'm so there with you. Like, that is such a good point, that like research is behind, right? Because by the time we get research to actually implement it in practice, it's already been effective for years on end.
Uh-huh.
I think this is where good clinical reasoning and also using theory, people are going to hate hearing me say this, but like
Not the
using
theory
theory
word.
to help inform how you think about things. So if you have a guiding theory that you use to guide your practice, you have a a way, it guides your thinking. It helps you organize your thinking in a way that can help you be more effective providing services for your clients, right? So if you have that theory in mind, if you're using a theory to inform your practice, then you can take research that is out there and make new connections and start doing things that are different. maybe even before the research is there. It's like, I don't know, when you talk about nature and children, I'm like, I don't really need nature, like research to tell me that that
Kids
works,
like
right?
being outside, right?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of innovation, I think, is like you need to know the evidence, but also some of it is just taking a risk and trying things and seeing what happens and taking your own notes. Take your own
Along the
notes, like
way.
being a reflective practitioner. This is something I have written into the Contigo approach, like, which I never finished explaining. I'm just not realizing, but oh
Yeah.
well.
We'll
In
get
a
to the
minute, I'll
last
go
piece
back to
here in a
that. But
minute.
I really, really want to say this one thing. So reflective practice is so important. It helps you be a better therapist. It helps you be more evidence-based because you can use your own evidence. I think when we say evidence-based, it doesn't just mean research, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You can take your own notes. What went well? What went wrong? What am I going to do differently next time? Those are the 3 reflective practice questions. I like pound them into all of our students, I mean, every time I teach, that's what I'm telling people to do, that reflection. Keep your journal, write down what went well, what went wrong, what you're going to do differently next time. Reread that stuff. That's evidence-based practice. That's looking at what you said you were going to do, changing something, modifying as you go, and using clinical reasoning to inform as you go forward. So I think remembering that evidence-based practice maybe doesn't just
It
mean
doesn't rest on
the
the academics.
research.
Yeah.
Yeah, it means using good clinical reasoning based on your own experiences as well. So, um, yeah, sorry, that was a meandering answer to the,
No,
to
I
the
love it.
question,
That's
but
great. I try to tell that to students and clients all the time. Like there's 3
yeah,
stools to the evidence-based practice. It doesn't all have to come out of academia. So, all right, we
yeah.
talked about the connection, we talked about transformation, and now we're at the last piece.
Yes. So in the great outdoors is the ego part. um, so so this refers to that idea when you first asked me the question, like, what is nature-based therapy? In this model, what it's referring to is that we are providing these therapy services in a relatively wild nature setting, an uncultivated nature setting, as much as possible. A lot of the things we do could be done on a school playground with some trees in a dirt area, like some type of
Yeah,
nature. It
you're
doesn't
not
have to
tethered to
be.
being in the wild.
Yeah, but it's really based on the idea this in the great outdoors part of the Contigo approach is based on the attention restoration theory, which it is, there's so much literature on this. It has been cited thousands of times since the 80s when it was proposed. But basically, attention restoration theory proposes that we have 2 different attention systems essentially in our brain, and this highly correlates with neurological findings based on
Uh-huh.
MRI studies. But we have directed attention, which is like our executive function, cognitive energy. You got to focus on something and filter out everything else and do deep work, right? And that directed attention, as we all know, is limited. It's depleted very easily, when you're
Yeah,
doing hard cognitive work. I
exactly.
always
Yeah.
say, like, taxes. Think about doing your taxes. Unless you're an accountant, everybody can relate to like
Yeah.
the
You
mental
feel just,
energy it
you turn
takes.
your head to the side and your brain oozes out, right?
Yeah. It's like you're just exhausted, right? And your directed attention can be really easily depleted. And then the other type of attention we have is fascination. It's naturally elicited attention. And attention restoration theory would propose that nature is the best space in which to restore our directed attention because nature naturally elicits fascination so often. You see a butterfly, you see a wild animal, you just see beautiful flowers or trees or the sky or rain, clouds, like a thunderstorm rolling in. I mean, just the beauty that we see when we're out in nature, almost no matter what kind of nature. It can also be terrifying too, and that gets
Yeah.
into fight or flight, and we won't go there in this
Yeah.
conversation.
We
But
don't want to do
but
that,
like,
right?
right. But in general, attention restoration theory was proposed in the early '80s or late '70s. Stephen and Rachel Kaplan, they are just amazing researchers. Anything they write is about, aligned with this topic essentially. But it's been researched over and over and over. And that is the foundational theory about why I believe that our services for children are best provided in an environment that is allows them to feel away. So, because when you see a building and you see cars and you see, you know, even bathrooms, even like structures that are like built structures, um, it it reminds you of daily life, right? But when you're away in the woods and you don't really see anything that's built, you're you're in a whole different setting. You're in a whole different sensory experience. You're connected to nature in that way. You're kind of one with nature, and you're not reminded of like the human built world. Um, Another thing that really relates to children that I want to mention is Roger Hart's work. So he's another researcher from the 70s. Like all this stuff is old, people. None of this is new. People have been doing this
For a
since I was
while.
born 44 years ago. But basically, Roger Hart's work is so interesting because he studied children's experiences outdoors, and he's written a lot of books on this topic too. But one of the things he researched was like the narrowed experience of children's ability to roam from home. So like in the 70s, he did research where he actually tracked how far kids go from their house, right? Like, so they're
Oh, I'm sure in the
going
70s,
3
there's like miles.
miles,
Yeah.
like, yeah, totally. I rode my bike all over my neighborhood when I was young. And now I'm like, I don't know that I would let my 10-year-old ride his bike as far as I did. And there's a lot of reasons for this, which we won't go into. But basically, he found that it had shrunk over the years. Like kids are staying way closer to home than they are able to explore out. And one of the comments he made in an article that totally stuck with me is that the built environment for children announces the presence of adults. It's
Oh,
like
wow. Yeah.
adults have been here. We built this bathroom. We built
Uh-huh.
this parking lot. We built this building. We built this playground for you. And nature doesn't have that. Nature's just like out there. Like no adults have messed with this space. And that's one of my favorite things to do in therapy is to tell the kids like, we're going to build a fort and no adults are allowed in this fort. Just you guys. Only kids can go in. I'm not even allowed in there, like, so because it's like an experience they don't have a lot in this world nowadays. They don't get to go alone anywhere,
And
really.
explore.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's an important thing for their development too. It's so important.
Well, and you think about like kids developing confidence, and I mentioned it earlier, like a sense of mastery or something like that. Like, how important
Yeah.
is that? We have a lease that we go hunting on. It's like, I don't know, a couple hundred acres or whatever. And I took my 5-year-old out there this past year, my 5-year-old, my 3-year-old, and they were kind of timid at first. I got them out and said, all right, we're going to go walk around the woods. I didn't even bring a gun. We were
Yeah.
just walking. And by the end of that trip, I mean, they were, oh, did you see me? And I was climbing over that hill and that log was there and
Yeah.
I jumped right over it. And I was like, yeah,
Yep.
bud, you're doing awesome.
Yep.
And they were
That's
just
so
so
great.
much more confident at the end of even like a 30-minute walk in the woods.
Yeah, you see it. That reminds me of a really meaningful moment that a parent made a comment. I think I actually put it on the website after I asked her if I could use it, because she said something to the effect of, like, at a group one day when they were arriving, she was recalling that they went on a camping trip. Their family had just gone on a camping trip the previous week or something
Uh-huh.
with his class, and she said he was exploring with other kids and he jumped off of a boulder, like from a foot above the ground, by himself, no one telling him to do it. And she was like, to other parents, that, I mean, it'll make me cry, seriously. She's like, to other parents, that's like a small thing. And to me, it was huge. It was huge. And that's why we do this, like, because nature offers that, like providing this for children, like it transfers into their daily life. When we hear stories like that from
Uh-huh.
families, that's what makes us like, this is why we do this, right?
Yeah, you're making
So
tangible impacts on clients' lives, right? That's awesome.
yeah, yeah,
So,
it was a good story.
yeah. So, I mean, the idea of what you called it, attentional restoration, almost seems like it flows with. Have you read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, like type 1, type
It
2 thinking and all
It's
that?
on my list, but yes, it totally relates to that. It is so on my list. That is a book that I'm like, I have a long list of after the PhD is done. That is on my list.
Exactly.
Seriously.
There's some, his
um,
books are pretty long, but I mean, it was a great read, but it's funny how you said, this stuff has been going on forever. And the more and more I feel like we learn about just psychology and the brain and the way we develop, like
yes.
a lot of it is intertwined, like this type 1, type 2 thinking correlates very well with this attentional restoration and how all of it's kind of blending
Yes.
together, right?
Yeah.
I think it's
Absolutely.
super fascinating.
And just to tie in theory some more and bore your audience. No, I'm just kidding. I'll make it fun. So that's one of the reasons that I love occupational adaptation theory, because part of that theory is the idea of primary and secondary energy. So, and you
Uh-huh.
can think of it like primary and secondary attention, really, because it's what our brain is thinking of. This idea that humans have the primary energy that we spend is like the where we're working really hard to solve a problem, or it just feels like frustrating, or we feel ourselves starting to like just hit a wall, right? And OA theory would literally say, like, at that point you need to let it, they say if you're an OA therapist, the big thing is like, oh, let it sit on secondary for a little bit. Like it's basically
Yes.
like use your secondary energy, because how many of us can relate to the idea of like you can't think of a solution to a problem, and then when you're falling asleep at night, or you're in the shower, or you're
Yeah.
driving and just no
You
noise is
put it on the
on, or
back
your
burner for
kid,
a little bit and it hits you.
put it on the back burner. So that secondary energy is like the back burner of your brain, where the idea in OA theory is that the work you did thinking about it, the work you did cognitively to kind of try to solve the problem from a cognitive stance, is still there in your brain, but that it when we can move to that, like throwing it on the back burner, it lets the creative ideas kind of percolate to the surface. And I love that that's part of the theory, that because I don't know any other OT theory that actually talks about that concept,
Uh-huh.
that how we need to manage our energy to effectively participate in occupations in daily life. So that's, my little
Yeah.
plug for
Well,
OA.
and
I
that
love
is
it.
totally grounded in research too. There's a book called Peak
Yep.
Performance where they talk about that. Like if you really are burning out on something, the research shows, 45 to 90 minutes is like how much you should be spending, like focused concentration on
Yep.
something before you take a break. And oftentimes in that break, you're like, oh, that's what it was or whatever. So,
Yes, exactly. And how many of us work for 90 minutes and then just keep pushing through to try to get it
uh-huh.
done, and we're wasting
Or
energy,
time,
really, because we can't.
calories really in our
Yeah,
brain.
yeah, right. Right, exactly. It does take energy. It's real. Yep.
Awesome. Well, we've been at this for a while, Laura. Thanks so much for being on the show. What I really want to ask is like, if you could just think of a couple big takeaways for an audience, like what would be one or two big points that you would want them to walk away from when they think about nature-based therapy?
Oh, I would want them just to take the risk and try it. Venture into it. Don't be scared. It's not rocket science. You can do what you do as a therapist outdoors, and look at how it changes how you practice. That's what I would say. To like just try it, and then do that reflective practice afterwards, and get started doing it. That's my
Okay.
main. You don't need theory, you don't need like big old trainings. I mean, I offer training, but like you don't need that just to get started and to start noticing it yourself. And that, I guess, that would lead into the second thing I would say, which is I really think that the best way to be a better nature-based therapist is to connect with nature yourself. Notice it, like just in your neighborhood, notice small little pieces of nature. Notice the birds, notice the squirrels in your yard or along the fence. Notice the sky, notice the clouds, notice trees. Look at stuff and notice it. And I think just that, you'll start to notice in your daily life, when you notice nature more, it has a really calming effect on the nervous system. And we
Yeah.
can offer that to our clients too.
Yeah. Almost modeling it for them. There's a great
Yeah,
book called Outside
absolutely.
Lies Magic. Have you read it?
No, another book to add. What's it?
Yeah, it's called
Outside Lies
Outside Lies
Magic.
Magic, but it's all about cultivating like an acute observation or observedness in the world. It's pretty cool. So he talks about like even out in
Oh,
your backyard, you can observe the sunlight beaming through the trees and all that. It's a good read.
oh, this is going to be a before PhD done book. Like I'm going to get this book today. That sounds fabulous. I will love it.
Yeah, glad I could help. So
That can't wait. That can't wait for a year and a half. Okay, I got to read that before.
yeah, good luck on that PhD, by the
Yeah.
way. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Oh, are you ready? I'm in too many places.
All
Okay.
of the places. Yeah.
I'm going to focus on I'm not in all the places, but I'm in a lot of places on the two platforms that I'm on. So I would say that if you're interested in nature-based therapy, the best place to get like free information and to be part of a group where I hang out a lot is the Therapy in the Great Outdoors nature-based therapist group on Facebook, which I moderate. So, or my business, I guess it's connected to my business page, but I moderate the group. I'm in there. And that is an interdisciplinary group of therapists that are interested in pediatric nature-based practice. We have some adult therapists in there too, I think. And there are lots of other Facebook groups too that people can join, but I'm primarily in that Therapy in the Great Outdoors one. And then if you want to know more about my business and kind of see, you know, a little behind the scenes of the business, there's a blog and we're on social media too. It's outdoorkidsot.com. On Instagram, it's at outdoorkidsot for the business. My personal Instagram / business consulting Instagram is at Laura Park Fig, because no one could spell Figueroa. So,
Yeah, even if they tried, right?
and park and fig are nature. So there you go. Park and fig. I kind of like it. It's weird sounding, but I like it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking the time.
Oh, Rafi, this was like my highlight of my day, my pleasure, the things I love to talk about. And you're great too.
Well,
And thank you
thank you.
for having
Yeah.
me.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Laura about nature-based therapy and how clinicians can integrate or leverage, or as she says, partner with nature to help bring about the outcomes that we ultimately want for our patients and clients. I think just going back and listening to the interview as I'm preparing this, one of the topic areas that I think bears more reading and thinking and discussion is the entire idea of evidence-based practice. We kind of talked about it a little bit in the middle there about how when we talk about innovating in the healthcare space and we talk about still at the same time being evidence-based practitioners, oftentimes we're stuck thinking about, or we end up solely thinking about the academic or the research or the literature aspect of evidence-based practice. But as Laura pointed out, and as we mentioned back and forth a few times, that there are three legs to the stool of evidence-based practice. One of them happens to be research, but the other two are your patient experience and values, and then clinical experience, of that clinician's clinical reasoning and judgment. And if you take the step to become a reflective practitioner, if you're constantly writing down, what went well, what didn't go well, what am I going to have to change for next time, and you do that as a matter of habit after every session or every day at practice, over time, your clinical reasoning and your clinical skills and the knowledge and experience you develop will in and of itself lead to a form of evidence-based practice. Clinical expertise, again, is one of those pillars or one of the legs of the stool for evidence-based practice. So I thought that was pretty interesting that we talked about it there. And I think in the future we're going to try to have somebody on to talk specifically about evidence-based practice and how do we reconcile being innovative in the healthcare space with also following an evidence-based model, or trying to do things that are grounded and supported in research and theory. Because we want to innovate, we want to be doing cutting edge or whatever. We want to be able to bring the newest and most readily available resources and techniques to our practice and to our clients, and we want to do it in a way that is still within the bounds of being grounded in what we know to be true and what we know works. So that's probably a topic for another day. If you like the show, it would mean a lot if you headed over to iTunes and give us a rating and review. It helps people find the show, helps people listen to the episodes and see what we're all about here. If you want to learn more, you can go to www.betteroutcomes.show. There you can sign up for our email list. You'll get new episodes delivered to your inbox every time we release them. We release new interviews every other week on Wednesday, and then every now and then you get a bonus episode whenever I get around to doing one. And at that website, betteroutcomes.show, you can also browse through all of our previous episodes, all the links to connect with our guests and reach out to them if you have questions about any of the topics that they discuss. So until the next episode, guys, be safe, be healthy. I'll talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the Better Outcomes Show, where we explore the possibilities of a new healthcare. Our hope is that you walk away from each episode informed, equipped, and empowered to push the boundaries in your own practice or business. We want to give you the tools to help you build strong, long-lasting relationships with your patients and clients, helping meet their goals, improve their health, and achieve better outcomes. Learn more at www.rehabpracticesolutions.com. We'll catch you on the next episode.